Hello, this is America, and this is the United States Institute of Peace. Or actually, correction, it is the Donald J. Trump U.S. Institute of Peace, because the president had it renamed last year. Remember, he calls himself the peacemaker-in-chief. But just how close is the U.S. to peace with Iran? How much longer will this ceasefire last? And is it all part of some cunning plan, or quite simply a sign of a president who has run out of options? I'll have more later, but let's get started with my colleague, Cyril Vanier, in our Washington studio.
Phil Lavelle, thank you very much. After bombs, threats, and emergency diplomacy, President Trump appears to be trying something new with Iran: patience. No deadlines, at least for now, and no threats of civilizational erasure. Donald Trump seems to be betting that his naval blockade of Iranian ports will weaken the Iranian establishment over time. Now, we'll be speaking to Mike Hanna at the White House in just a moment for more on that. When the U.S. president extended his own deadline to resume the U.S. military campaign against Iran, that was on Tuesday, it wasn't a total surprise. He's done that before. But this time, he didn't postpone by a day or two, as he's done. He left it open-ended, and that feels new. White House spokesperson Karoline Leavitt calling it an act of generosity, but also making it clear that this is part of Trump's pressure campaign.
President Trump announced an extension of the ceasefire. He's maintaining and generously offering a bit of flexibility to a regime who has been completely tarnished because of Operation Epic Fury. And the president wants a unified response. And so as we await that response, there's a ceasefire with the military and kinetic strikes.
And that ceasefire extension is raising questions. Is it a new window of diplomatic opportunity, or are we just normalizing a prolonged period of instability? Al Jazeera's Rosalind Jordan reports.
After nearly 8 weeks of war, the U.S. is now observing an indefinite ceasefire with Iran. What can U.S. President Donald Trump do now to end the war? Some 50,000 U.S. troops deployed to the region are on standby, while Donald Trump is waiting for Tehran officials to offer what he's calling a unified proposal for peace. But it may be the Iranians who are trying to run out the proverbial clock.
Who knows with anyone, but who knows with Iran in particular?
Despite Trump's bluster, the U.S. is winning the war. A majority of Americans is not convinced and wants him to end it.
How many people did you kill today?
And reports suggest that he may be giving Iranian leaders a pretext to refuse all negotiations, so long as the U.S. naval blockade continues. Plus, Tehran continues to impose global economic carnage of its own by controlling maritime traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, a strategic card of pressure that could force Washington to release billions of dollars in sanctioned oil revenue in exchange for Tehran's abandoning its nuclear weapons ambitions, one of the original reasons why the U.S. said it launched the war. Tracking the changing ceasefire timeline has been anything but simple. April 17th. Trump announces Iran has agreed to everything, including removal of its enriched uranium, and that talks continue. Iranian officials soon deny Trump's claims. April 19th, Trump says if Iran does not sign this deal, the whole country is getting blown up. April 20th, Trump is adamant he may not extend the ceasefire if there's no deal with Iran. April 21st, Trump says the same team led by Vice President J.D. Vance is about to land in Pakistan for talks, but it turns out Vance never leaves Washington. Soon after, Iranians announce they won't be going to Islamabad. And then Trump says at Pakistan's request, he's extending the ceasefire indefinitely, but won't give the Iranians what they really want, an end to the blockade. President Masoud Pezeshkian calls Trump's actions the main obstacles to genuine negotiations. And that criticism is at the heart of why the ceasefire may drag on, a lack of trust in the other party's ability to negotiate in good faith. But without talks, both countries run the risk of not getting what they really want, an end to the war. Rosalind Jordan, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Now, Al Jazeera's Mike Hanna is live at the White House. Mike, over 7 weeks, we bounced from one Trump deadline to another. Is there any timeline anymore for this conflict?
Well, it doesn't appear so. The president in recent days hasn't been speaking about a timeline for the conflict itself. He's been speaking about this extension of the ceasefire and a timeline for that in which the answer is there is no timeline. That's according to the White House press spokesperson, who made very clear that this is no deadline that President Trump is setting. It's basically open-ended. And he, says this press secretary, will decide when or whether that ceasefire will no longer be extended. So everything is in his hands. It does appear very much that President Trump is playing a wait-and-see game. He claims that the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz is a very effective tactic at getting the Iranians back to the negotiating tables because of the massive financial loss that they are incurring. This does appear to be the only strategy that he's got at present, and that is to wait this one out. What he does not want to happen is for everything to descend into chaos again, because that is going to be politically damaging. The alternative, have an elastic time frame for the ceasefire to continue.
Yeah, Mike Hanna at the White House, thank you very much. Donald Trump has repeatedly made threats that he would end Iranian civilization or bomb the country back to the Stone Age before going on to delay with extended ceasefires. Republicans are framing this as an act of mercy, giving Iran a final chance to surrender their highly enriched uranium. Here's Trump ally Senator Lindsey Graham posting, "Like everyone, I hope we can end the reign of terror of the Iranian regime through diplomacy." But he also added, quote, "Time will tell." Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. told a House hearing that Trump's threat on social media that a whole civilization will die tonight was the president sending a message of compassion and love to the Iranian people. Democrats see Trump's move as nothing more than a stalling tactic to hide the fact that the president doesn't have a plan. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer posting, "Trump is desperately searching for any sort of exit ramp from his ridiculous bluster." And House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries told CNN there needs to be a permanent end to Trump's reckless war of choice. So is this a tactical move by Donald Trump? Richard Gaisford looked at how the president has approached these situations in the past for clues.
He calls it the art of the deal, and there's no doubt that Donald Trump gets results when everyone involved has an incentive to sign up. The Abraham Accords, agreed in 2020, began the process of normalizing relations between some Gulf states and Israel, an historic moment for the Middle East. But persuading a hostile adversary to shift position has proved a much tougher task. Despite warm words and unprecedented meetings, Trump failed to bring North Korean leader Kim Jong-un into the fold.
Stepping across that line was a great honor. A lot of progress has been made.
With the threat to its near neighbours still all too apparent. And despite much optimism, Trump's been unable to persuade Vladimir Putin to agree terms that could bring Russia's war in Ukraine to an end.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
A previous Republican president faced the seemingly impossible task of ending the Cold War with the Soviets and reducing the number of nuclear warheads. Like Trump, Ronald Reagan used military might and economic pressure as a lever, but Reagan also had a consistent strategy, a clear diplomatic approach that allowed him to get the deal that he wanted. His opponents understood him, and he understood them.
I think we have great support.
And that's the biggest difference with this Republican president. Shifting strategies, changing priorities, and public performances might keep the world on its toes, but it also makes gaining ground with distrustful opponents that much harder. Richard Gaisford, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Joining us now, Kenneth Katzman, former senior analyst on Iran at the U.S. Congressional Research Service and former U.S. ambassador to Bahrain, is also with us, Ambassador Adam Areli. Kenneth Katzman, Donald Trump is trying to suffocate Iran's economy. That's where we are right now with the U.S. naval blockade. Can that work? Can that deliver what the U.S. president wants?
Cyril, thank you for having me. It can work, but it's going to take time. Remember, Iran is not exporting any new oil, but they have 160 to 170 million barrels of oil afloat all over the world, waiting to be delivered, that went through the Strait of Hormuz before the U.S. blockade.
So that oil will be sold and that revenue will come in?
Correct, because it's already out of the Strait of Hormuz. So unless And we've seen this in the past couple of days. Mr. Trump has now directed the U.S. military, it's not all CENTCOM, it's all over the world, he has directed the U.S. military to start seizing those tankers that were exported through the strait a long time ago. And we've already seized one off Sri Lanka, and there are others that may be seized too, to try to shut down all of Iran's revenue from oil.
How many tankers are we talking about?
It could be hundreds. It could be many, many tankers, yeah.
Okay. That's some perspective, because if one tanker has been seized, we're talking about one of maybe hundreds. Ambassador Areli, do you believe in this strategy?
Not, do I believe in it? I mean, yes, if all things being equal, but all things aren't equal, right? I mean, there's a famous saying in planning that the military planning that the enemy gets a vote, right? So you can be in the White House and say, okay, we're going to do this and this and this, and then this will happen and that will happen, and then okay, fine. I mean, it makes sense, except that, you know, the enemy has a vote. And like Ken said, I mean, the Iranians have prepared for this eventuality. They have their own plans. They've got alternative means of storing their oil, of selling their oil. Even if they ran out of oil, they have ways to survive a very tough blockade and sanctions regime that, frankly, I think will outlast Trump's patience and the patience of the American people. I remember, this isn't just about moving soldiers and ships and planes around on a map. There's politics involved here in the United States, and Trump is nothing if not attuned to the political winds. And for that reason, I think that you've got this Iran strategy on the one hand that runs up against an electoral strategy on another hand, and therefore the question is, which one is going to give?
So time's a really important factor here. Kenneth Katzman said it could work, but it will take a while. How long are we talking? I ask you this because Donald Trump himself has posted on his social media, Iran is losing, or rather is not making $500 million a day in oil sales that it normally would without the blockade. And I'm seeing calculations online, people engaging in math of how many days Iran can go without those $500 million a day. As part of the Congressional Research Service on this and an Iran specialist, did you ever, or did anybody in the federal government ever engage in that kind of math and say Iran can last X number of days?
Well, it didn't go quite that way. I mean, we looked at Iran's assets abroad. Remember, they've usually had about $100 billion in various banks abroad, central bank accounts held abroad, Japan, South Korea, and those are the assets Iran wants unfrozen. Mm-hmm. The sanctions block those assets, and Iran wants that money because they are getting a little tight on cash, let's say. But the issue is, you know, this is what an Iranian professor told me on another Al Jazeera arm last night, that Iran can last till August with oil. Those barrels abroad, afloat, can get them through till August, which is a long time. Does President Trump have till August? Probably not. So what I've said on this show and other shows is he's probably going to have to look at kinetic escalation if he wants to bring this to the conclusion he wants, or he's going to have to accept less than the deal he ideally wants.
Ambassador Areli, the White House spokesperson mentioned other pressure points on Iran that this blockade might trigger. Number one, that Iran's oil storage is filling up, and that if it fills up, then that can damage, the assumption being that might damage their oil infrastructure, something they would want to avoid. Number two, and the president has mentioned this as well, that if the Iranian government is starved of cash, then it can no longer pay government workers, including police and the security and law enforcement apparatus. Do you think that those pressure points, do you see them as relevant?
Relevant, but not determinative, in the sense that, you know, obviously you got to pay your soldiers, right? On the other hand, Iran has sources of revenue other than oil, number one. Number two, Iran and the Basij and the IRGC have revolutionary fervor, which means they can they can survive, they can tolerate pain for a lot longer than I think most American decision makers and planners calculate. And so there's an incalculable here that, or something that we just don't know, which is, how long can they go with under siege conditions? I think they can go a lot longer, especially than most people imagine, especially when it comes to kneeling to the Americans. I mean, there's a level of pride and survival. They're at war with us. For them, it's a war of necessity, right? They've got to survive. For us, it's a war of choice. We can walk away tomorrow and America will be just fine. So that, I think, that puts things in different perspectives in terms of how much pressure they can withstand for how long.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier that the Iranians are probably more capable of taking this for a period of time than the U.S. In other words, the breaking point for the U.S. may be reached sooner than Iran's. Let's see how this is playing out across the U.S. media. Here's Al Jazeera's Phil Lavelle.
Yeah, Cyril, every pundit and journalist from the right to the left is really trying to get inside President Trump's head on this. And it's become something of a national pastime. And the answer is nobody really knows what the president is thinking, but they're all giving it a go. And most of them are focusing on strategy, or more to the point, if there even is one. For example, let's take a look at Axios, which says it is all part of a trade-off. Now it writes, extending the ceasefire cost Trump some leverage. He believes the naval blockade he kept in place will more than make up for it, claiming the Iranians are, quote, starving for cash and can't even pay their military and police. Now, Axios seems to have more of an idea of what's going on than News Nation does. Now, if you don't know this network, it is a national cable channel. It generally refers to itself as centrist. Sometimes it gets criticized for being a little more right-leaning. But either way, on this, the anchor summing it up with a metaphorical, who knows?
President Trump may be screwing everything up, or he may be an absolute genius. We don't know. It's only fair that we tell you we don't know. What we can say for sure is that right now, the Iranians appear in control, and the United States does not have the momentum.
So to The Guardian US, and it notes the president's tone with one word, conciliatory. It says Trump's announcement extending the ceasefire marks a more conciliatory tone. There it is. And it balances that with terms like whiplash and confusion. See there, the whiplash and confusion between war and peace talk has become the hallmark of Trump's approach to the war. Right, let's take you over to the left-leaning MS Now. Stephanie Rule is one of their big evening anchors, and she was discussing this very confusion. And her panel painted this less as a deliberate strategy and more as a president who is completely out of choices.
I think it was the only option that President Trump had left, to try and dial up the war again after we've hit 13,000 military targets and have not achieved the submission of the Iranian government would have been foolhardy.
OK, let's talk money. And Bloomberg focuses on how much President Trump had the markets in mind when he made his decision. Remember, we know he is a keen watcher of those numbers. It says traders feel relaxed because of their reading of the balance of risks and how they appear to President Donald Trump. And it goes on to say what markets really couldn't tolerate would be an escalation involving a US ground operation and Iranian attacks on Gulf energy infrastructure. But the ceasefire has shown that he's more concerned to find an off-ramp. Convinced that this meant there would be no escalation, stocks have had space to surge. Question is, for how long? And that is what's being entertained by the right-leaning Fox News. Now, Sean Hannity is one of its biggest names. He's also one of the president's biggest cheerleaders. He says even though there is no definitive end date here, he's got it on good authority that it's only going to be a matter of days. Take a listen.
According to the White House, a beaten, a battered, now near close to bankrupt Iran and government there will have no more than 3 to 5 days to present what would be a unified response to the president's peace proposal. Let me make this very simple. If anyone in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard or any other faction of Iran's, remaining government is watching, or you hear about this, I know you like Fox News, your unified response, it better look like this.
Who knows? Maybe the Iranians are watching Fox News. Hosts like Sean Hannity are listened to by the president. So it could give them some good insight into what Donald Trump is thinking in a situation where nobody knows what is going on in the mind of one man. Be it cunning, be it chaos. For the networks and the news sites, it is all just speculation. But it's giving them lots to talk about and lots to fill the airwaves with.
Okay, so there's everything in the U.S. media, we just heard it, ranging from the U.S. president has no plan to actually he's playing 3D chess and, you know, people will catch up with him, but he's way ahead of everybody. Ambassador O'Reilly, perhaps more relevant to the outcome of all of this is how Iranians are interpreting the president's words and actions. What do you think? You've been an ambassador in the
Well,
region.
again, when you say Iranians, I think it's important to be a little bit more specific.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got the Iranian in the street, you know, or the everyday Joe or Jane, and then you have the leadership, and even within the leadership, there are different factions. So I think when we say Iranians, let's narrow it down to the leadership.
I mean leadership.
Okay, the leadership. It's interesting. Trump said, you know, we're going to extend the ceasefire until they get their act together and come back with a unified position. Well, they may not do that, right? And there have always been these tensions between those who want to negotiate and maybe make compromises and those who are hardliners and, you know, going to stick to their guns. Right now, it would appear that it's that latter group that is driving the bus, so to speak. But either way, let's be clear. The Iranians have been studying us very carefully for some time. And when I say studying us, looking at what we did in Iraq, looking at what we did in Afghanistan, looking at what we did in the last time we hit them in June, and, you know, what our decision-making process is, what our pain tolerance is, what our, you know, patience level is, and what our off-ramps are.
That goes both ways, by the way. I mean, obviously, the U.S. federal government is full of people who have been studying Iran. Kenneth Katzman is one of them.
I disagree. Yes, they're full of Americans studying
30 years
Iran.
spent studying Iran in the Congressional Research Service, right?
Yeah, fortunately or unfortunately, yeah.
But the point is, most of those people, I've worked with them in the U.S. government. Most of them don't speak Persian, haven't lived in Iran. And let's remember, it's one thing to study Iran, where you don't have access to a lot of information because it's a closed society, for goodness sake. Or study the United States, where everything we do is out in the open.
Kenneth Katzman, it's interesting, this idea that Iranians have been scrutinizing the U.S. and therefore they may have good insights into how to handle the U.S. I mean, couldn't the reverse be said? People like yourself, and there are others within the U.S. federal government, have been spending a whole lifetime career studying Iran and doing the same thing, trying to game out what could happen.
Yeah, and I think we all said it was going to go down pretty much as it has, which is that if all you're doing is bombing, you're not really going to get anywhere with the regime. Remember, they went through the Iran-Iraq war where they had rationing. They were exporting no oil. Okay, these guys know pain. The only way you're going to shift their calculations, and I've said this on this show many times and other shows on this network many times, is with some sort of a ground operation. And that doesn't mean an occupation. What that means is a ground operation that convinces them their time could actually run out and they may actually lose power out of this. That's the only way you're going to change their calculation.
And to another point that you made and Ken made, it's one thing to have people in the United States studying Iran and knowing Iran and being able to say, if you do this, they're going to do this. There are people like that, and Ken's one of them. However, does the person in the Oval Office listen? You know, anybody could have told Trump and Hegseth, if you do this, then what's going to happen is what we're seeing happen. Well, they didn't want to listen. They thought, okay, we got the answer to this. I can play 3D chess.
Netanyahu, the
and you see where they are.
Collapse, yeah.
There is.
Netanyahu said if you just kill Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader, the whole system collapses. And that was obviously not correct.
There is analysis, there is expertise that filters up into that room, right? That is delivered to the president. By the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, by possibly the vice president, the secretary of state, the secretary of defense. You're both saying no?
You talk about, you had a section on the press here, right? On the U.S. press. You didn't include this article in the New York Times that talked about the decision-making leading up to this, which was that Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, was very careful not to
give his opinion.
Not even to give
military assessments.
Not to challenge Trump. And to only give assessments that were neutral, Well, if you're a commander of the forces, you have to be able to say, you know what, this is probably not going to work. But he's more concerned about his job than he is the military campaign.
Kenneth Katzman, go ahead, real quick, last word.
There is a way out of it. Like I said, there are ways out of this. Either Mr. Trump is going to have to accept an agreement that falls short of unconditional surrender, which he again reiterated yesterday, demand for unconditional. He either has to accept less than that, or he's going to have to go to kinetic escalation, including ground operations, in my view.
Kenneth Katzman, former senior analyst on Iran at the U.S. Congressional Research Service, and Ambassador Adam Areli, former U.S. ambassador to Bahrain. Thank you very much to both of you for joining us on the program. All right. President Trump's evolving strategy is also being scrutinized by the American public. Watch this with Alex Beard.
First, there was the blockade to a blockade, and now the extension to an extension. That being seen by some over here as a total diplomatic failure, being spun into something generous. Trump once again accused of negotiating with himself, not just at home, but in Tehran.
If Iran doesn't come to negotiate, we're going to bomb them.
2,000 years later.
So where are the Iranians?
This was pushed by Iranian state media, openly mocking Trump. But the White House says take that at face value.
What they say publicly is much different than what they concede to the United States and our negotiating team privately.
Trump supporters see that extension as part of a grand strategy. The president taking his time to get the best for America while Iran lives in fear. Others telling Americans to trust the plan, saying this time is crucial to prepare the military for any possible escalation, and that Iran is being economically throttled. Trust Trump, stand firm, free Iran. But in the other camp, there are fears the ceasefire is doomed.
Sources telling me that the ceasefire extension in Iran announced by the president, that will be short-lived unless a deal is reached quickly.
For conservative podcaster Daniel Davis, Iran now has the upper hand as the US bleeds cash to maintain its blockade. A strategic stalemate from both sides with no clear endgame.
And that's it from us in the Washington studio. Back to Al Jazeera's Phil Lavelle.
Yeah, Cyril, on our next edition, we're going to be looking at the issue of Iran's highly enriched uranium. Remember, that is one of America's red lines. Should the US seize it? And if it chooses to do so, what does that even look like? How is that going to work? That is Friday, 18:30 GMT. If you're here in the United States, it's 2:30 p.m. on the East Coast. And we will see you then. Bye for now.